So I was told the other day by some of you guys that you really hope I come off with a little bit of a braggadocious nature in this video, but rather than that, I actually want to focus more on what happens next. And to catch everybody up to speed, if this is the first video in the series that you're seeing, hello and welcome to the channel. My name's Brian, and if you're a returning subscriber, welcome back, you sexy beast. That's what you get for subscribing, by the way. Free compliments at the start of these videos. Now, this past spring, I released a video called Why Everyone is Wrong about New World, breaking down some of the analysis that I've seen content creators make around this game and why it's wrong. Because when I take out all of the factors and only focus in on the data, my model for MMO success is driven off of only a few key points. You don't have to agree with them, but stick with me here and at least hear me out in this video, because I believe we're seeing this, and this is why this video needs to be made now, and to talk about it, especially as it relates to New World. It's three key pillars, but they're supported by a couple other things, and that's actually what we're seeing right now. First one is content. Content is king. Communication is critical, and consistency is vitally important to the success of an MMO. And why is this? Why does these three pillars drive this game? Well, first and foremost, New World isn't a carbon copy. It isn't a clone of World of Warcraft. And I think that's actually a key factor, is that it does something different. It offers something new to the player base. Is it unrefined? Yes. But that is also the history and story of the MMORPG. But regardless of that, it has a hook. It has things that people, whenever you talk to people, when you talk to any of the content creators who are bashing on this game, and I'm not going to say they were wrong for doing so, I'm just saying that I think they're missing a couple of really key data points, and we're going to talk about that actually in this video. But when you boil it all down, the fact that it isn't a clone, it does some things definitely differently. It gives it the ability to have a hook, right? And I think one of the easy hooks to identify is the world, is the sound design, is how the game feels when you play it. Everybody who's especially left the game say, man, there's something special there. There's some kind of magic there. I hope that they can refine it. And so that's kind of a key data point, in my opinion, that I identified. But when it comes down to it, even having a hook doesn't necessarily matter if you can't release content, if you don't communicate and you don't do it consistently. And this really is built off of the Final Fantasy XIV model. For as much as people praise Final Fantasy XIV for all the beauty of its story and whatever reason that they decide to love that game, one of the things when you strip all that away, it's that the game is has content coming out very consistently, and the devs communicate often. And this is actually really impressive, considering that English isn't their native language. And so the fact that we typically have these mini hype cycles tucked into this grand hype cycle within Final Fantasy, I think is what I identify as the MMO genre moving forward. Whether you like it or don't, we can always talk about that. But in this case and in this context, I think hype is key. So all that being said, that's the TLDR. If you guys want to go watch that video, it's still up. I put it out there, especially in the darkest times, specifically in the darkest times for New World, because that's how much I actually believe in the data model that I've established for what makes MMORPGs a success. Because it's not about how they launch. It's not about what crippling bug might be plaguing the community. It's how do the devs respond and how do they address it. And so the New World devs have put out videos every month, and they're very active on the site and they're very active on the forums, but they sit down and they take our concerns and they address them and they talk about them. And this last week, the New World devs got together and started teasing off the Brimstone Sands update, the Great Sword, and so much more. And the question was, what kind of impact is that going to have? And having played on the PTR, I can tell you, hands down, they are nailing it right now. The New World devs, I think, fully really understand what the players are wanting, and there is a lot of things that they need to work on. But what has happened is now we're seeing a mini hype cycle. Hype is critical. It's a critical component to any MMO because it's always looking about the future. MMORPG players, if we're honest with ourselves, are kind of addicted to hype. We're always looking at to the next big MMO. Hype is a key component into driving people into games. Now, it's not sustainable. You can't build a game on hype alone. At some point you have to deliver. But if you look at games as a service games, the ones that are successful, they have these little mini hype cycles. I call it the 3 seasons of the MMO. You have hype, you have grind, and you have bitch. And those 3 things together drive it. Now, You don't want the third season to be the longest running season possible, because then you end up having a lot of people frustrated. But as soon as you start building into that next hype cycle, that's essentially kind of a critical component to these games and to their successes. And Final Fantasy XIV does this exceedingly well. As soon as you start to even get frustrated or maybe even burned out, all of a sudden we're talking about the next patch, or all of a sudden we're talking about the half patch. And New World is the same way. Now, they have been putting out content regularly, like kind of with an update every month or every other month, and they need to kind of figure out that cadence. There's nothing wrong with saying that you're going to have a big update every 3 months or every 4 months, or heck, even like we're going to do 1 month strong, 1 month, just kind of bug fixes and balances, as long as it's consistent, as long as the players can come to expect it, because from a content creation perspective and a conversation perspective, it ends up being very easy to kind of always point to the next big thing. Devs talking about mounts. People are wondering now when are mounts coming in? Well, we don't know yet, but just the fact that they are acknowledging that, I think, is a really key component and is critical. So hype isn't sustainable, but it's a key part of the formula that gets people excited. But let's talk about really what happens next. And this is critical, because one of the problems that New World was always going to have and still has is words really don't matter. They talk about a 10-year plan, but nobody really understands what Amazon is up to. Now, I have actually more insight into what they're doing, and that I think is something that is a missing thing. Not everybody's going to have this information, and so that's fine. But ultimately, Amazon is all in on gaming. And when they say that, like as a company, that's why Phil Spencer lists them as a main competitor. That's when you look at it. I think a lot of this is going to drive into the concept of Prime Gaming, but we'll talk about more of that here in a bit. Actions are more important than words. And I think New World and the devs are actually showing by their actions that they mean what they say, but it's still going to take a little bit of time. We still need a year at least before people stop worrying about the active player count and just settle in. But as the player count continues to grow, which it has already massively spiked this weekend, it introduces brand new problems to the game. The problems that have been there since launch in the sense of servers and queue times. So what I'm talking about, guys, is last night I had a 40-minute queue to play the game. And when you go look at the numbers over this weekend, we saw the largest amount of returning players playing consistently over the weekend that we've seen to date. And this is a good thing, right? It's a good problem to have, that people want to play the game. Only this kind of feels like, hey, see you next year, same problems next year. And it's because the devs have to now spin up new servers. They also have to figure out what their fresh start server plan is versus obviously like, hey, we're creating new servers to help balance it, or we're going to increase the server capacity for people playing the game. All three are viable paths. I think all three are actually on the table for them to do them, but we don't yet know. Now, when it comes to new servers, both fresh start and with new servers for players to come and just play in on, the key critical component that's missing that they say they're working on, we just don't have an ETA on that yet, is cross server play for PvP and for the dungeons. One of the things is that this game, you can play on a small server, and there's nothing wrong with that. A lot of people actually enjoyed that experience, only that it does cut you off from being able to do certain content at certain times, because your server might not have the population needed in order for you to participate in the 3v3 arena or into OPR or even into the expeditions. It seems like all their instance content is making their way that way. Now, also, they've been taking like their wars, and it seems like invasions and those pieces of content, and moving them into kind of an instance, thus taking the pressure off the servers themselves and allowing for a more smoother style of play. And based off of that, I do suspect that we'll see the server cap increase with the Brimstone Sands update. I don't know if they're going to go to 3,000, but they could go to 2,500. Any number increase in being able to get more people on the server at one time, I think is going to be a valuable addition. But I think what also happens next is one of two things. Scott, the lead director, he's been teasing some things for us. And this is going to enter us into a bigger hype cycle if one of two things are true. I do believe that they're going to go with the paid expansion. They could also go more the No Man's Sky route and go with kind of a bigger updates within the roadmap, or just like, hey, we're going to have a big update once a year. whether it's a paid expansion or not. And then we're going to have like the other kind of quarterly updates as a part of our cycle. As long as it's, they communicate that, they're consistent, and we have an idea of what's coming, I think that helps build that hype and that excitement, so that when you do feel like you need a break or you want to go play another game, and then you come back to say, hey, what's all new in the game, I can tell you what's already been added, and I can tell you what's happening next. And I think that's a key aspect to the conversation. But anyhow, we still have that on the horizon. And if it ends up being a paid expansion, I think what you'll end up seeing is even bigger numbers. An expansion communicates a lot to MMO players. It feels like it's always usually a doubling down or an added commitment, to the genre, into the specific game. And I think this is rooted in MMO history, where we're used to that style of model. And the reason I think paid is that people who play this game want it to be successful, and one of the concerns that people have with the numbers and why they use the numbers is they feel like, oh, it's not making enough money, Amazon's just going to go ahead and kill this project, because Amazon doesn't have a track record. But when you factor out what other companies have done, and you actually just look at AGS at the core, they have enough money, they have the servers themselves, so in terms of costs, they are able to kind of manage that and write that off into some respects. But what is really more important is that what they're also telling us. Now, it's rumored that they're going to be publishing Throne of Liberty out of Korea. I'm betting they're going to be working to pick up even more MMOs. They're working on more also internal games and internal MMORPGs. And with that, Amazon in and of itself and their investment into the MMO genre is really quite unique and interesting. And even if you're skeptical, even if you don't want to believe a single word that I say, that's something I think you should at least put on your back burner. You need to have that in the back of your mind for now, and then you look forward into the future. Now you see Sony kind of looking at trying to pick up more and more games as a service, which is interesting considering that they let their, they owned EverQuest. They had the Daybreak Studios, like all that. They let that go back in the day, and we really haven't seen much from that. But how interesting would it be for them to have those IPs still to this day? So their push into acquiring more games as a service is starting to mirror what we're seeing, obviously, with Game Pass, what we're seeing with Amazon and MMORPGs. And I think a big key pillar here is Prime Gaming. Whether they decide to charge for it on their own, whether they decide to increase the value or the cost of Amazon Prime itself, I think essentially they're trying to bring more value to Prime Gaming within their wheelhouse. And an MMO is a perfect idea for that. In fact, one of the core aspects that people say, like, oh, New World doesn't have a subscription, they're going to struggle financially. I think they're going to introduce the Battle Pass. I'm wondering if we're going to start to hear about that here in the next coming months. Because they did say they'll talk about us in 2022, and we haven't heard anything. Fears of this game becoming pay to win have not come to fruition, and yet their other game, Lost Ark, which you could argue is pay to win, or you could argue that it isn't, is just dominating. And whether you think that's just all bots or not, it's still a massive success. And I hope that they don't go that way with New World. I hope that within the Amazon, the AGS MMO offerings, that they have a wide range of different business models so that you as a player have more choice rather than saying this is the one way we go about it. But I think a paid expansion is going to drive a ton of people back into the game. And so hopefully they can figure out what they want to do with the servers, and they need to kind of figure that out, I think, pretty quickly. Over this weekend, we saw a massive jump without necessarily content. This wasn't a jump based off of an update that happened. This is a jump based off of the promise of an update to happen, and that is a really important thing. I think we'll continue to see kind of the numbers kind of ebb and flow a little bit, up and down a little bit. And as Amazon communicates more about their vision, I think that's going to drive a brand new hype cycle. Because one of the things that will be interesting to see in the long run of it is with New World is that you can play New World today, and you can also go play on the PTR if you're curious. But most likely, more than not, people are going to play on the live servers. And you can go do that while being excited about what's to come, and your investment in the game now pays off down the road. It's got a player-driven economy. You can go, and if you just want to craft and gather, you can do just that, and you can be viable. You can actually get amazing gear, and there's a whole game, a mini game in and of itself within gear acquisition and perk management. And so when it comes down to it, like, I think they've really hit the nail on the head. AGS with New World has done an incredible job with their communication, and they better not stop. Like, what's the most important thing is, I think now that they're starting to really kind of see the excitement build up for 1 year, like now that we get past year one, MMOs, in my opinion, have always kind of taken like 2 to 3 years to really mature into that like really solid experience. And so if you like being a part of that and having your feedback heard and being able to shape the future of the game, this is a great time to be in. But if you're really waiting more for that curated experience, that really solid foundation, like, yeah, probably here in a year or two, that'd be a time for you to check it out. The key aspect though also is that it's absolutely free. Like the game sold really, really well. So for anybody who's like, oh man, should I return? It's like, it costs you absolutely nothing. There's no subscription fee. There's no money that you have to put up front to be able to update your game and then jump back in and play it. And that's also another key aspect to why I think, and I'm very bullish on the future of New World. I think it's really going to shake up the MMO, like just the genre itself. And somebody was saying like, oh, they don't think it's going to be a top 5 game. Like, New World has the opportunity and the potential to be easily a top 5 MMORPG. It feels like that. It's got a massively next generation feel. But again, we'll have to wait and see. I feel very confident that New World's going to continue to succeed. It's going to continue to grow, and it's going to set up AGS, especially for their other MMOs, as a pillar within the genre itself. It's going to still take a little bit of time. A lot of people are still on the fence, and I don't blame them. But when you just look at I think when you remove the emotion from the equation and you just look at what they're doing in terms of their actions, I think it's clear to see that they are all in on gaming. Anyhow, let me just look over my notes, make sure I got everything. Player population. Yeah, you're still gonna have people who are just gonna discount the game. I think that's a kind of a theme. I don't know. Time and action is going to be the only people who how you win over those people, and that's just going to be it. Oh. And then as we wrap up, I do think they need to communicate, especially if it's not a paid expansion. They talk about a 10-year plan. They don't need to be like massively detailed on like what 10 years means, but they need to start communicating beyond, like 9 months, right? Like if it isn't a paid expansion and it ends up being kind of like, hey, here's our plan for year 2 for New World. They also need to start talking about some of their goals for year 3 or their goals for year 4. It doesn't have to be solid, but it needs to be something that we can point to and say, yeah, guys, after year 2, this is what their goals are for year 3. I can't wait to see what content, how that roadmap gets filled in with new things. And I think that's going to be important. Now, if they do announce a paid expansion, honestly, I would make sure that they announce that in terms of a roadmap, like, hey, yeah, paid expansion, here's when we're thinking about it. And then we'd like to, in X amount of time, a year or 2 years after that, paid expansion 2. It's that promise of a future that's really critical to the success of any and every MMORPG. Anyway, guys, thanks so much for watching. If you guys want another video, YouTube's got one over here or maybe another one over there for you guys to check out. Also, if you're looking for more content, you can check out the podcast. You can listen to MP3 wherever podcasts are consumed. You can check the links in the description for Epic Blue Radio. I hope you do. Thank you guys so much for watching today's video. I hope to see you in my next one, but until then, take care.